think we talk about villages, we tend to over-romanticize our villages. Because if you're a Dalit in a village, there's nothing very nice that you want to revitalize about that village. In terms of, especially you take governance and all that. Who wants the traditional systems of caste governance in the village if you're a Dalit? So I think when we are talking about village, we need to bear this in mind. We need to bear about it and not think of the village as a homogeneous unit, which is the same all across India. We are not. We have, when it comes to tribal communities, they are very different what they mean by a village. And when it comes to a village itself, there are, if you want to say villages within villages or whatever.
Disaggregation is actually ignores the injustice within the family. So we need to go beyond. One of the lessons we've learned in the women's movement is that the means to overcome the disparities in the family are not directly by addressing the disparities in the family, but by forming collectives and cohesive spaces for women to be able to even express and explore means of addressing justice.
Sorry, could you just say that again?
That the group, that the other entities of organizing, such as the group, have given women the space to move beyond the family to spaces that they can create for themselves to seek justice.
What is the equivalent or the
narrative of the Sangha is about women seeking a space within a village entity that allows them to negotiate equality, justice within families as well as within the village.
No, so and taking it, since you said it's a step further, that you say that you don't just engage with disparities just within the family.
Yeah.
So when you have injustice within the village, is it just within the village that you can deal with disparities? For example, tribal society is a very homogeneous society. In that sense, you can deal with some disparities very differently. Whereas the normal mainstream villages got caste identities, where you require some outside help to be able to deal with those things. Just as you're saying, for women, it has to be a collective solidarity outside. So what's the equivalent in a village that you would look for solidarity? That's what I'm asking. What's the next step in a village?
So even within a tribal society, in my experience, there are also power dynamics there between families. There's the Gamethi who will dominate and the others who will fall in within the limits of that hierarchy to demand spaces as well as resources, but the limits are drawn by the leadership who usually dominates the resources. So the village is a space of negotiating rights and justice across gender, class, caste, whether it is tribal, Dalit or gender issues.
The kind of hierarchical structure goes deep into the village, and so the question becomes like, are we there are two possibilities there, right? You basically say, okay, all of the kind of existing social structures need to be kind of attacked, and like you need to kind of recreate a new human being, a new man, new woman project, and this has happened in other parts of the world where they've tried to do this, but the consequences have been disastrous. And or the other approach where you, for example, create other collectivities that accrete on top of the existing social relationships. So, for example, when you're creating a Mahila, like a self-help group, like you are kind of saying, okay, these are the existing social relations, and we are going to actually create another entity. And now, to me, these are the kind of two options that exist. The second option is more gradualistic. It's not that kind of, you don't get into antagonistic relationships with hierarchy straight away, but it also does kind of challenge identitarian politics that emerges out of the first approach. Like, you might increase caste consciousness, but that doesn't mean that people actually get out of caste, right? We have seen how basically it fuels even more trenchant kind of caste solidarities, and that fuels it further. So for me, this is this is something that one needs to kind of think about and figure out what an ecological kind of a sensitive approach to village reimagining will look like.
Theoretically, this sounds very nice, but in practice, I don't think you can create an alternative without conflict. The moment you try to create this alternative, there will be resistance. And you cannot do it without resistance. And to think that you can have this win-win, which is, I think, one of the most nonsensical management terms that I've come across.
The daily struggles of life, I mean, they've taken different forms in urban and rural context, but the daily struggles of fuel, of fodder, of water, of food, these are things that have been ecologically embedded, right? And that we're shifting from domains of getting our fuel requirements from alternate sources because there is less access to the forest resources, or less access to the commons, or the commons don't have the forests or the wood at all, or that the wood has been used for other purposes, for commercial purposes, etc. And so there is none. So this shift in the kind of relationship we've had with nature and the environment is also causing those shifts in the social relations of caring for the environment as well as of the caring economy, the way we practice social gatherings, for instance. The women in Adivasi areas, from going to collect the wood, being chased by the forest guards and their axes in the areas I work in, their axes being pulled from their hands, they being compelled to go to fill penalties to get their axes back. By being chased by their own one mitra in the village is a person from the village. And there's a hierarchy of that one mitra on the women and how they can exercise the right to those resources. So a conflict is not something that's alien, but how it's negotiated and what are the spaces and institutions to negotiate that, I think, is important to how we take our dialogue forward.
If we're truly talking about revitalizing the village, I think the point remains that there's nothing like a village. There's no one unit that you can prescribe sitting here. There's a scale at which even that might work. The other point that one would like to make is that this is about collectivizing without some of the injustice elements that used to exist there. So I would go with what he's saying. There's of course conflict in that also, but there's no overt conflict. There are ways by which you create transformation insidiously. There's strife there, but there's no bloodbath kind of strife. There's no overt thing, and that's the story that Chandrama was telling us yesterday. I am familiar with stories of Reddy men walking into a Dalit woman's house to borrow seed. In the case of DDS, for instance. So they didn't even think of untouchability. It didn't occur to them that this was breaking the barrier of untouchability. So I do think we are talking about building certain other processes which work in insidious ways, which of course are orchestrated with a design, but happen more silently and so on. And the reality of this country today, while we sit here, is that there's already a range of village situations out there. There's the village of Raigada Dongriya Kond, where even food is from gathering up to something like 35-40% to this day. We're not even talking about cultivation. And there is of course labor exchange. There's collective doing of things for certain basic things, and we are talking about all those peri-urban places which may call themselves villages, but where the aspiration for a city life is very high.
We make the elementary confusion between exchange and reciprocity. Now, to me, anthropologically speaking, it's very obvious that exchange is a very, very reduced, rudimentary form of reciprocity. Exchange is what capitalism has done with reciprocity. But reciprocity is millennia old. And no society of any worth or durability has ever existed without reciprocity. Now, for instance, let me give you an example of what I mean by reciprocity. Suresh and I can have an exchange if Suresh does something for me, and in the community, I remember that in front of everybody else, and I do something for him someday in the visible realm. That's exchange. Reciprocity would be if I do for Suresh what another friend has done for me,
or I pass on to my children or to your children what has been passed on to me across time. So visibility is not the criteria of reciprocity. Measurability is not the criteria. इंसानों के बीच हिसाब साफ हो जाता है. So this notion of reciprocity, which was fundamental to our society and still I believe remains fundamental, has to be emboldened and given more confidence to. And it's only with reciprocity that you will be able to defeat exchange. You know, to put exchange in its place, to put money in its place. Because you see, money, you can't forget that money today, as for 5,000 years, but especially today, is fundamentally a way of indebting human society. And if that function of money be allowed to survive, then we are done for. Then one way or another they loot us. So that function of money, which has to do with indebtedness and putting you in debt peonage forever, so that you will be laboring for capital in perpetuity, that thing has to be finished once and for all. And in order to do that, an intermediate step could be reducing money to medium of exchange. I am not sure how collectivization of cash can work, or even collectivization of credit. I mean, microcredit is a very good example of that. I have many more cases in mind about how those cases fail, because you can't just change one piece in the puzzle. What they have succeeded in doing in less than a generation in India is to completely alter not so much our way of life, but our way of looking at our way of life. And which is why I'm saying that we have to attack psychology.
Way of looking at?
Our way of looking at our way of life. Our self-image, our collective self-image has taken a huge knocking in these last 30 years. So that's why I think that the cognitive part has to be brought back.
I think the reason why there isn't that confidence is because we do not have the difference in vocabulary is not just language. The different vocabularies, as you said, we have trinkets. We have this awesome aura between the vocabularies, difference of aura, right? So how do they actually communicate?
How do you?
How do you actually communicate between those vocabularies when they are so different in nature?
Gandhi and Marx said that
that is
before
fascinating.
that all that the poor need to do, all that the rich need to do is to get off the backs of the poor. We always think the poor have a problem and we are here to solve it. No, it's the other way around. It's closer to the other way around. So we are actually not strict enough and harsh enough with ourselves and our pampered metropolitan classes. We let them get away with completely mediocre public life and nonsense, basically, lies over time. I mean, for instance, just to give you an example, people talk about agriculture so much, except the most important question about agriculture is not being faced today, which is, there are two visions of agriculture in India right now. One is the corporate vision. So basically, smallholder farming must come to an end, hand over everything to mechanized, industrial farming, and second green revolution, bring in Monsanto, Syngenta. Within half a generation, we'll have solved hunger forever. This is one vision. The other vision is, let's retain smallholders, make them stronger, do more land reform, and so on. The whole land reform agenda has been thrown off the table. So if you follow the first route, which is what our elites unanimously want to do, here are the implications. Let's assume you succeed. In 20 years' time, you have a situation where India is now producing food for its population with machines. You have more and more fossil fuel consumption and demand, which you can't handle, and you have very limited climate space. Right? And moreover, you have a whole generation of young men and women in India who don't know how to do farming. So when the fuel,
They have nothing else to do.
they have nothing else to do. So when the fuel runs out, when there's no climate space, how will you feed 1.5 billion people? Somebody needs to think about it now, because bad decisions now will have consequences. So this is the way in which we let our elites get away with bad thinking. The most important thing to me, in my understanding, and I have very limited understanding of the village directly, is the psychological aspect. And today, given the way global capital is working around the world, here's one example, the language in which I speak is another example, and so many others. Cash, very importantly. If you do not tackle the psychological dimension, and if you do not actually strengthen people to retrieve confidence. Retrieve, I'm using that verb very precisely, to retrieve confidence in their way of life, which is primarily, for want of a better word, I will say rural, but in line with somebody like Tagore, I will say it is civilizational. When Tagore believed that India's civilization was different from Europe's, fundamentally different, because it was a religion of the forest. Our understanding of civilization is not leaving the jungles for the fields and the fields to the factories and the factories to the offices and the offices to the screen till the whole cosmos becomes one big office, which is what the internet has done. So that is not our vision. We have betrayed that vision in profound ways as an elite. I'm as culpable as anybody else. And we have not actually recognized the virtues of our people. And here I mean people who've lived, who've been born, lived and died in a village. We've not recognized the virtues, so we have actually lost that vision. Who are the people who can retrieve that vision for us? Not us city dwellers, because we simply do not have that in our direct collective memory. So we need to be much humbler and go to people like Ravin Sharmaji and others around the country who actually are still in touch. People like Stan and his group who are still in touch with a way of life from where the water can re-emerge in the stream. It's not going to come from Ganga and Yamuna anymore, right? So my point is that the urbanization of the mind, which has happened thanks to these technologies of mobility and technologies of artificial whole, the urbanization of the mind has to be challenged. How do you challenge that? We are all on that battlefield of consciousness, which we don't even recognize as a battlefield right now. We don't have the terms of discourse for it, we don't have the conceptual vocabulary for it, and we are constantly trying to battle Behemoth, which is running us down, like you said, as a tank. And they're going to send more tempting tanks in our direction and bribe the hell out of us. What the Americans have done, which is uniquely different from the Europeans, is that they've learned that force and threat of use of force are actually much weaker weapons of social control. That greed is a far more effective weapon. You know, Facebook works because it feeds your vanity. Socialism failed because it fed your morality. You know, and vanity is always going to be stronger than morality in human society. So that's why things are the way they are. So if we do not deal with psychology and if we do not have a way of dealing with the urbanization of the mind, then we'll constantly be slipping down the cliff. You know?
And how is it that we look at ourselves to be part of that process, to be part of that solution? I think that's something that we have not explored very well.
Well, I want to say one more thing. Yeah. See, this is part of a bigger plan. I've lived 10 years in the US and I know how the imperial mind works. They will first find out through their intelligence over a long period of time everything that's wrong with your society. Which is why caste. All you hear from the West about us is caste. You can't understand India without caste, etc. This is part of a plan. The British, they did not so much object to the injustices and inequalities of caste. What they did not like was that the community that caste goes with, or rather more precisely jati, goes with, that community would not allow the market to grow and for the state to exercise hegemony on society. Right? I'm not a fan of the caste system at all. I'm just saying that the British had their own reasons for objecting to caste, which had to do with the extension of commerce and the extension of the powers of the modern state. Once you've created a consumer, once you've created a citizen, the community can be thrown off the shelf, which is what their vision of India is.
I am constantly trying to keep a lookout for homogenization, and be it in food, be it in culture, be it in activism, whatever. So I am increasingly seeing, when you talk about culture, it's very interesting to hear you talk because you're mentioning names we don't know. That's nice. But Gandhi, Tagore, yoga, I don't know, that is the mainstream. So that, I hope I'm not offending anybody, but it's the whole Brahmanization of all aspects of life. Right from education to your food, to what you wear, to where you agree. Okay, that's great. because I see it in the organic food sector very strongly. It's the meat is dirty, is bad. Organic is great. Vegan is even better. So it's a kind of I don't know if this makes. Yeah, it's a casteism, but it's spreading everywhere.
Yes.
You can see it in clothing. You can see it in schools. You can see it in culture. Sadly, like music. Why yoga? Why not kolatam? Why not kalaripayattu? Who does that? You know, why is that not the mainstream? Why is that not the alternative? Why is the alternative the piousness, the cleanness, the Aryanness? I don't know if this is. But it's just great.
Yes, good, yes.
So I think that the youth also, by within an alternative, if you're clearly saying this is the alternative, then you're automatically cutting out a lot of the youth. Those who love their meat, those who love their where they come from, their goddesses who eat meat. Their goddess is not Saraswati who's wearing a white sari and sitting piously. She loves her
And
meat.
holding lotus. Or was it?
So there's a why Tagore? I mean, none of these people inspire me. None of these people have led. They have talked and written a lot. I'm sorry to say, but that doesn't resonate with me. And I think those three women sitting there have stronger backs than anybody who's done yoga. So it's, I don't know.
Yeah, well said.
And lastly, how do we deal with, I mean, it's something that we all keep saying again and again, and it somehow feels tiring to be bringing up some things in discussions 100 times. I feel, somewhat immoral and unethical bringing up certain things about how the village economy should be when I am the person who is creating aspirations of a different kind in the villages. What are we doing to tackle lifestyles of a particular kind which are creating extreme aspirations in certain others? I mean, it's said again and again, but not enough is being done there. So how do we collectivize in a city, for instance, to reduce your resource use? Even as we stem movement from villages to the cities by dignified occupations and professions, dignified viable professions.
Okay, the ideologues. One of my points was about the ideologues, somewhat similar to what Molly is saying. The only people I know about, I haven't worked with indigenous communities very much, I have a very little understanding of it. But the only people I think who have really sustainably lived along with nature have been indigenous people. So where are they? Where is that represent? Where are we learning from them? That is alternative to the mainstream. That's one thing. Second is, if you want to, there is a system that is systematically, it is destroying everything that we are talking about, believe in, all that, from wildlife to people. So when we create an alternative, why don't we dismantle that also? Why aren't we looking at how to dismantle that system as opposed to just create an alternative which they will anyway hound? So it may not be the forum because dismantling something has to be done kind of silently. But I think young people need to be really told that is an odd option, not just, get on the internet and do some EA activism. Unless you dismantle those fellows, they're going to get you.
చినుకులేక పులకించని భూమి